I like to make music, and over the course of slowly learning how to do that, I've accumulated quite a few free plugins and instruments, many of which I've never used. I'd like to know what some of them are, so I picked one at random and I'm going to try to use that to make some music. This is the VL Tone by Polyphony. It's an emulation of the Casio VL1 VL Tone keyboard. I think I downloaded this a good 10 years ago, and to my knowledge I've never actually used it. I have my DAW open with the VL Tone loaded up, as well as a tuner and a limiter in case it's too loud. I've dropped in a MIDI file that goes through the full range of notes that one can probably use with this, C-1 to B8. So let's see what notes it can play. I'm only getting audio on the left channel, so let's squeeze this down to mono. And try again. Okay, so because this is an emulation rather than a sample-based instrument, it can play this full note range, which is pretty nice. And it's pretty much in tune, which can't be said for all free synths. Okay, next is a section to test the response to velocity. And a test for polyphony. And a test of how it treats a few different articulations. Playing around with this, I found quite a few parameters that you can adjust, and while it initially seems that there might be between 40 and 50 different instrument sound combinations you can get by adjusting the program and sound parameters, because of what the synth is recreating, there's actually not that much timbral variety, and there's really only a few sounds that are immediately usable to my ears. All tested, this synth has some good features. It has a very wide tonal range, and using the octave and tuning parameters, you can further expand or fine-tune that range. It responds to note velocity, which is not always a given when dealing with free instruments, and it has some usable sounds. On the other hand, it's very easy to break. I had to reload the thing 3 or 4 times in 10 minutes of testing when I adjusted the wrong parameters in the wrong order and rendered it unable or unwilling to make sound. It's monophonic, which is expected given what it's emulating, and it has some really bad sounds, which again is kind of expected given what it's emulating. I'd like to use this to make a song, but I'm also feeling very uncreative right now, so I thought I'd share a method I use to work through writer's block. For my particular workflow, I like to write everything in Sibelius, mainly because I can read and write on staff notation faster and easier than if using a MIDI piano roll. And while it's possible to open a variety of plugins and synths in Sibelius for playback, I'm just going to pick a temporary sound to work with in here, and I'll play around with the sounds of the synthesizer once I drop this into my DAW. To start, I'm going to pick a simple meter. In this case, I'm just going to leave it where it is, which is 4/4, and I'm going to arbitrarily pick a key, B minor, and I'm going to write 4 measures of quarter notes on the tonic of that key, so that's 16 Bs. Without touching the pitches, I'm going to change the rhythm. Some notes get longer, some get made shorter, and I'd like to add at least one rest in here so it's not just a constant barrage of tone. Once I have a rhythm that's at least somewhat interesting to me, I'm going to listen to it a few times and play around with the tempo until I settle on a tempo that works for this particular rhythm, like where just it clicks and feels good for me. Now that I have a good tempo, I'm going to slide the notes up and down in my kind of arbitrarily chosen key one by one until I find a melody I like. Now that I have the first 4 measures of this melody, I'm going to do the same for another 4 measures. I'm not paying attention to chords or using any amount of theory, but with one exception, and that's the last 2 notes. Since I grew up in the US, I'm enculturated to find a half-step resolution at the end of a phrase pleasing, so the second to last note is going to be a half step away from the last note. During the process of writing this lead line, I've heard it enough to have an idea of where I want to go from here. So for the bass, I'm going to write the opposite part. It's going to have short notes when the melody is long and long when the melody is short. And again, I am not thinking about theory, I'm just writing notes that sound good with the melody. Well, I'm thinking about theory in one place, and that's the last 2 notes. I want to make sure I end on a tonic chord, and I have a nice dominant chord before that, because again, growing up in the US, I am enculturated to Western European music theory, and that's what sounds final or good at the end of a phrase. I think I'm going to have 4 parts here. A high synth part playing the lead, a bass, and a couple synths in between to fill out the chords. So I'm going to add another. I'm going to keep this one really rhythmically simple, and I'm just going to go off the lead and bass lines to select a note that harmonizes with both of them. I'm just kind of picking chords that are in this key that go with both of these notes, and again, the only time I'm really thinking about any kind of theory are the last 2 notes. Okay, I don't mean to make this too cliche, but since I have a soprano, alto, and bass voice, I'm going to add a tenor part to fill it out. For this, I'm going to alternate between mirroring the rhythm of the lead and bass parts, wherever I think the rhythm is more melodically interesting. And I'm going to think about chords a little bit more. Since I have 3 notes to go off of, I'm just going to complete the chord, primarily sticking to triads and 7th chords just for simplicity's sake. And now that these notes are written, I can add some dynamics. Since the VL-Tone plugin responds to velocity, I can use the dynamics in Sibelius to control the volume, which is terribly convenient. And with that, I think I have the A section or verse section of the song done. I want to have a very short intro, maybe less than a beat even, then jump right into this section, followed by a B section or like pre-chorus, and then a C section or chorus, and then some kind of wind down. And after that, another version of the A section where the melody will be the same, but I'll change the rest of the parts. A shorter or altered B section, and then a double-length C section where it repeats, and then the second time around it changes the inner voices. And I'll just end on a D section. So now that I'm working with the actual synth in Reaper, my initial concern was that maybe these sounds are going to be a little too harsh, considering I'm going to have 4 of the same synth and almost nothing else. But after playing around with it the way you would with any instrument, adding, EQ, maybe some reverb and delay, some amp sim, it sounds reasonably okay to me. I'm also using what I think is the best feature of the synth and changing the instrument sounds section to section so it's a little less aurally boring. I have the tendency to overwrite my drum parts at times, so I'm keeping this pretty simple and I'm just using some lo-fi kick and snare sounds. So, what are my thoughts on the synth? What are my thoughts on the VL tone? How would I rate it? I don't really like the idea of coming up with a number on a scale because, what does that number even mean? So how about this? Would I use it again? Yes, I think I would. Would I use it for general use or to fill a specific role? I think this is more for a specific role. This is for like lo-fi retro sounds. It is a bit too harsh sounding for me for regular general use, and I think I would have to play around with it a little bit to find the best use for this particular plugin, but the fact that I'm thinking about other ways to use it is a good indication that yes, I kind of like it and will use it again. Would I recommend it to others though? I think so, with the caveat that it's kind of janky and you need to play around with it to get a usable sound. And as far as I know, there's really nothing that does what this does but better. But then again, it might just be due to my own lack of looking. I don't really need to use a Casio VL1 VL tone sound that often. This is still freely available from a variety of sites, including the creators. So if you're interested, it is another tool through which one can make music. A bit of a postscript. Between recording this video and uploading, I actually ended up using it again in a guitar-based song that I'm still in the process of writing. Here's a sample. And for now, that's all. Go make some music.